Hi, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio, where our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the station or the host. Always seek your primary care physician's advice. Consult with your primary care doctor, always. With me today, I am so excited, folks, and I am so grateful that I get to meet and talk to wonderful people who have a passion to help others. And that's what Chatting with Betsy is about. I have a passion to help others. And I always have exceptional guests on, and today I have another exceptional guest on. My guest today is Dr. Eugene Lipov. He is an author, writer, a speaker, board-certified anesthesiologist, board-certified pain physician, chief medical officer at Stella Center. He is also a medical consultant to ERASE PTSD NOW, N-O-W. Dr. Eugene Lipov is a pioneer and researcher, post-traumatic stress treatment, an advocate for PTSI to replace the clinical diagnosis of PTSD. We're here to talk about his book, The Invisible Machine, the startling truth about trauma and the scientific breakthrough that can transform your life. It's also with Jamie Mustard. And I want to welcome Dr. Eugene Lipov to Chatting with Betsy. Welcome, Dr. Lipov.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. It is my pleasure and an honor to have you on. I love the book cover, by the way, the picture of the brain with the different colors on it. And I would like to know, Dr. Lipov, we'll start with this. What motivated you to write this book?
Well, I think it's really important for us to I think people need to understand what happens inside their body, especially the brain. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. Technically, I'm really not a psychiatric professional. I'm a medical professional. So I look at everything biologically. So if you look at it biologically, if you understand what happens in your brain, I've been on TV a number of times. I've had multiple various coverage, but there's never enough time to explain what really happens, how does it work, and if people start to think of PTSD as PTSI, post-traumatic stress injury, which I think we'll get into a little later, but if you look at it as a biological condition, and then I just finished a survey actually showing that if people look at it that way, a lot of the stigma of mental health will go away, and if the stigma goes away, people will seek care. So to me, that is a huge thing. If people could start thinking about PTSD or anxiety as a mental or a brain change that is reversible, then I believe that's a huge thing. That was a main focus of the book. So if you think of the name of it, it's called Invisible Machine. Invisible Machine is our name for basically sympathetic system. So fight and flight system has a lot of impact. So if you look at that impact, then you can actually do something about it. And that's why I got into that field, but because as an anesthesiologist and a pain guy, I can actually do something about the fight and flight system or sympathetic system.
That's what was so amazing and I found interesting in your book. And I never heard until I read your book about the Stellate Ganglion Block. And I thought that was, really interesting, and to hear all these people's testimonies of how it helped them with their post-traumatic stress injury was fascinating. And you're right, Dr. Lipov. I'm a huge mental health advocate, and I'm not ashamed to say that my audience knows. I tell them all the time, I'm an open book. I'm seeing a psychologist for post-traumatic stress injury. And I feel like if I can say that, maybe it will help someone else, prompt someone else to say, well, if Betsy could announce it and she says that she's going, then maybe I can go too. because we need to talk about these issues and get this stigma erased and bring these issues out into the open. That's one of the purposes of my show, is to talk about what people think are the uncomfortable, because we need to talk about it till it becomes comfortable.
Well, it becomes normal, right? It can be uncomfortable, but broken leg is certainly uncomfortable. But if it's normalized and people actually can look at that and then go, well, I have a broken leg. All right, let's go get it fixed. It's real, it's biological. It's not like nobody's saying broken leg disorder, right? They're saying it's a broken leg. You have an X-ray, you
right.
get it fixed. Okay, but if you start thinking like that about mental condition, that's a total different story. I think that's going to save tons of lives, which is what doctors should be doing. And the ones who don't die with PTSD or PTSI, they live in life in misery, and they make everybody around them miserable. They don't mean to do it. They can't help it.
Yes, that's very, very true. And I heard a saying. Actually, I've interviewed several people about mental health and about post-traumatic stress injury disorder. We have no problem, right, with people getting treated for football injuries, their knees, their shoulders, even if someone has a concussion. But why is it there's such a stigma if someone says, you know what, I need help dealing with what's going on, or I was traumatized by an event in my life or events. The men and women who served this country for years, they didn't have treatment. They didn't recognize post-traumatic disorder injury and with the military people. They just, you just had to suck it up. Same thing now with the men and the women, nurses, doctors, first responders who responded to COVID and other traumatic events are having now burnout, and they are having this post-traumatic injury. And we need to talk about it.
No question there. I agree with that.
Can you explain, Dr. Lipov, of the am I pronouncing right, the Stellate Ganglion Block, and what that is and how it can help?
Yeah. So basically, stellate ganglia is basically, it looks like a sun. That's why it's called that. So it's basically a bunch of nerves, sympathetic nerves, or fight and flight nerves, which are connected together in the neck, and then eventually go up and connect in the brain, connect to the brain to the limbic system, or basically part that, like the reptilian brain, people call it sometimes. So part of the brain that controls PTSD or anxiety, PTSI, is called the amygdala. So as long as there is activation of the fight and flight, so what happens, to understand, I think you need to understand what PTSD or PTSI is. So let's say there's severe trauma, and then after severe trauma or multiple little traumas, which add up to be significantly problematic, so the sympathetic system, fight or flight system, gets turned on. It grows extra new nerve fibers, and all those sympathetic nerve fibers in the brain produce extra norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is like adrenaline. So as long as that state persists, people have symptoms of PTSI. So when I do the Stellate Ganglion Block, or when SGB is done, what it does is two things. Number one, it reduces norepinephrine levels immediately. So a lot of times people feel markedly better in 10, 15 minutes. And it also reverses extra nerve growth in the brain. So an injection that lasts 8 hours can last for years. I don't know if that makes it clear.
That's awesome. So if someone were to go to your facility and they would like to have this procedure done, is that just a one-time procedure, or do they have to get it done periodically?
It depends on, well, the longest outlier right now was about 17 years ago. We took care of a guy who had to shoot a child in the line of duty in Iraq. So he had like an explosive belt on him and things like that. So it's been 17 years. So he had 2 injections 17 years ago. So it depends on 3 things. Depends on genetics. Depends what you do afterwards. Do you do psychotherapy? Do you take care of yourself? Do you do meditation, yoga therapy, things like that? It also depends what happens. We took care of, for example, a policeman. He was doing great, and then he had to shoot somebody in the line of duty, and that flipped him over.
Yes, I would imagine so. And I tell people all the time, Dr. Lipov, on my show, not to judge others, and that it is not a weakness to go for treatment, to go for help. It's actually a sign of strength to say, hey, I need help here. I mean, from reading your book, it's really fascinating. Now, you have a clinic, you have a place you're in Chicago, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have satellites all over the U.S.?
Yes, we have 35 clinics. So I'm a chief medical officer for Stella Center. So we have 35 clinics in U.S., and we have 1 clinic in Israel and 3 in Australia.
Wow. That is amazing. Now, does somebody who hears the show and they go, well, that's something that I would be interested in, how do they go about it? Do they need a referral from their own doctor, or do they consult with you first?
So the way it usually works is people call up Stella Center, or if you go on the website, www.stellacenter.com, then they would be connected to our nurse practitioners who do the screening. So after they do the screening, then we can tell them they're appropriate candidates or not. Obviously, they should consult with a psychologist, psychiatrist, or primary care, whoever else they want to talk to. And that after the screening process, then we tell patients if they're a good fit for us or not.
Oh, and that's very interesting. I was really interested in when I read about the block. I was like, wow, I never heard of that before. Now, this might sound like a crazy question, but is that different than pain management when people go get like a pain block in their cervical area?
Well, I'm a pain management doctor, so I do. If you're talking about an injection done for, let's say, arm pain, somebody has a disc fracture and they come in and they have a procedure for arm pain, that's a cervical epidural. That's different. If somebody comes in for something called CRPX, complex regional pain syndrome, or the burning of the hand, that's where usually we do stellate ganglion blocks for that. So that's a standard therapy.
Okay. The reason why I asked is that I might have to go for pain management. I'm not thrilled about the thought of needles going into my neck. So I was wondering.
That's why I do is I give people sedation. So about 3/4 of our patients go through sedation. They do not have. They do not do it awake. It can be done awake, but 3/4 go to sleep. And when I had mine done, I went to sleep. I didn't want to feel it.
I would want to be asleep too. I'd be like, knock me out.
Exactly. So in 5 minutes procedure, So Stellate Ganglion Block is how I started, and then we advanced to the next level, which we call DSR, Dual Sympathetic Reset. So we do a 2-level injection instead of 1, and I can tell you how that came about, and that seems to work better.
I'd like to ask you, if you don't mind talking about yourself, Dr. Lipov, how did it help you with your post-traumatic injury?
Sure. So first of all, I had a lot of trauma. Like when I was in Ukraine, when I was 6, some of my friends found an unexplosive ordnance and blew themselves up, so that one of them lost a leg, another one lost 2 arms, and it was horrible. Then when I was finishing medical school, I got hit by a propeller boat, and I almost died in ocean. Then my mother killed herself when I was intern. So I've had quite a bit of trauma. So then and I was actually doing okay, and then we adopted a kid, and he was not particularly easy to work with, but his behavior was very difficult to navigate, and I would actually go into fugues, which is basically I was like immobilized mentally. It was really interesting to see. So one of my buddies diagnosed me with fugues. I had it done, and the fugues went away, and I was able to deal with my kid better, and my wife was really happy that actually I was able to be present and do things I'm supposed to be doing.
I think that what is being more talked about now, and I'm sure you could probably say some words on this, is transgenerational trauma that's passed on from one generation to the other. And you come from the Ukraine, and were your parents, were they alive during the Holocaust time?
Yeah, of course. My father was in World War II. So Holocaust was World War II. So
right.
They were not in Ukraine. Fortunately, my mother was moved somewhere, and my father was he was actually fighting with Germans. So he certainly was not in the concentration camp, thank God. But yeah, so a third of my family was killed in Babi Yar, which was outside Kiev. But
yes.
let's about the multi-generational trauma. As I have one of my interests. So besides MD degree, I also have a genetics degree. So the big thing now, all the cool kids are talking about epigenetics. Epigenetics is basically a change in DNA, not a mutation, but it can actually change from the environment, which is really interesting. So it turns out when somebody has trauma, that trauma stays in DNA for the next 2 or 3 generations. So I'll tell you what that looks like. Yeah, it's a really crazy idea, because if you look at what happens when somebody has DNA change, it persists. And let's say somebody has a history of trauma before, let's say a father, right? And then when the kid is exposed to trauma, the chance of developing PTSD is significantly increased just because of previous generation being exposed to trauma. I wrote a paper on that, actually. It turns out there is a specific part of the brain, a specific part of DNA that controls something called NGF, nerve growth factor. That's what makes things grow in the brain. So when somebody has trauma, emotional trauma, I'm not talking about physical trauma, what happens then is that NGF is produced, and that increases the growth of sympathetic fibers or the fight and flight fibers in the brain, and that's what gives somebody PTSD. So if somebody has DNA makes them predisposed to make more of that, they're more likely to develop PTSD.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So if an individual, a child, I'll just say if a child is brought up say they had parents, and you hear this a lot. I've seen this a lot watching clips of children of Holocaust survivors. Their parents obviously had post-traumatic, pass it on to their child, who then might pass it on to them. Plus, if those parents were abusive in any way, or maybe that person had a traumatic event, that just adds on top of that.
That's
that
exactly
is
right.
like,
Yep.
yeah, that is really mind-blowing. I remember watching a clip. I used to have, when I had TV, watching Jewish Life television, and this one woman said that her mother would carry food with her in her pocketbook because she starved during the Holocaust, and she was afraid of starving again. And, you know, you may not, a parent may not intentionally do it, but you might pass on the fears to your
Well, it's not just fear,
children.
right? I mean, it's actually physiologic. A brain is changed. So there was a study, actually, the whole epigenetic field started with Dutch people because they were starved by Germans, and then they were giving, I think, 700 calories per person per day, which is suboptimal, clearly. And what happened was the kids, the obesity level is much higher than it should be. So that's how the geneticists figured this out, which is pretty interesting to me.
It is interesting because, as I'm sure you probably know, Dr. Lipov, I mean, like many years ago, we didn't talk about mental health issues. If you had any kind of distress, it was dismissed. These, unfortunately, these men and women who were in the military, their problems were dismissed. You know, it's like, you know, suck it up, you know, get over it. And the thing that people need to understand is you can't just get over it. You don't get over.
That's exactly right. You can't get over it.
You cannot get over it. Maybe you could get through it with help, but there's no getting over what your eyes saw. You know, you saw someone getting blown up. If you were had a violent attack on yourself, that's not something you forget. Seeing dead bodies, not something you forget.
I agree, but just the mere, but think about just the mere fact that we are talking about it still in 2023, that this is not a mental, this is a real condition. It's just sad that we still have to talk about that.
Yes, it's sad that it has not been recognized and that people were not properly treated. You know, you hear the story of General Patton in World War II smacking a soldier.
Yep.
Because,
right.
you know, he had probably back then.
He called him a coward.
Yeah. A coward, yes. And he had, you know, they would call it battle fatigue back then. It just, people just don't understand, especially back then, what happens to people. So I am really thankful, and I'm really grateful for people like you, Dr. Lipov, that are studying this. You have something to help people. And
thank you.
You're welcome. And I think that's wonderful. I mean, you know, if someone's listening and you want to try the Stellate Ganglion Block, contact. The information is going to be in the blog. Read the book first, actually, The Invisible Machine, and read these people's testimonies to better understand how it helped them.
It's now on Audible, so if you don't want to read, you can actually listen to it too.
Oh, great. That's good too, because a lot of people don't want to read; they rather hear it. Exactly. So that's good to know. It's on Audible. I just really, as my own personal experience, I could speak to, and well, first when I was a caregiver for my mother-in-law, and I felt that I had post-traumatic, It was shoo-shoo, no such thing. And then after my husband died, and I was his caregiver for 10 years, I knew I had it. I knew, but I didn't have good insurance at the time. So now that I'm on Medicare and have a supplement, I am getting a counseling by a psychologist. And what I found with myself, Dr. Lipov, is that when you've been running on adrenaline for so long, and now you're not because your loved one died, and you still can't get off that adrenaline, like you're in hyper mode. It's so hard to explain to somebody who doesn't understand.
Right, unless you're actually experiencing it. That's
yes,
right.
Yes. I know myself, I'm much better now, but, I'd wake up and be like frantic. Oh, I have to remind myself I don't have to rush around. I'm okay. I could calm down. But your mind still acts as if that event is going on in your life. It's very hard to come down from that. That's been my experience.
No, I think you're right. I think that's true for most people.
Yeah, and I have a support group for caregivers, and you hear this from many caregivers. And now caregiver post-traumatic stress disorder injury is being recognized, and I'm glad it finally is, because caregivers do have that. Have you seen that in your practice, Dr. Lipov? Caregivers caring for a spouse or a child having this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, the term we use is called secondary PTSD. So let's say we see, so we can talk about it. So some people, you can describe PTSD or PTSI as infection. So if somebody has it in the house, everybody else can get it. Because they think about it, let's say a military person comes home, beats up on the wife, or does something that's very uncomfortable. A lot of times she will get PTSD. So a lot of times what we try to do is treat both the spouse, the primary PTSD person, as well as the children. So people forget about the kids that absorb it as well.
Yes, and children, yes, it does, definitely, because children, and I don't know why people dismiss children and their mental health, because children can have mental health issues, and they can have post-traumatic from, their parents' behaviors. Maybe they were abused, I'll give you an example. I'll give my own life an example, because that's the only thing I could compare it to, and my life's an open book. My dad was in World War II, traumatized from that, but before that, Dr. Lipov, he was abused by his uncle. His uncle used to beat him until his father stopped it. So he had trauma on top of trauma. So then my dad emotionally abused us. So I had trauma from childhood plus caregiving. And, it's tough to go through. I mean, but back in 1974, when I first started to have treatment for depression, it was not talked about. It was something to be ashamed of. I was made to feel ashamed because I was speaking out and saying, I'm depressed and I need help. And I guess I was the rebel in my family, because I said, I need help. I need to speak to somebody. And I was made fun of. My family made fun of me. And ironically, my sister went for therapy later. And I said, not so funny, is it, when you're going for therapy? And she apologized. So,
well, it's easy to judge people, right? It's always easy to judge people.
No, I say to people, you don't know what life has in store for you. You don't know a curveball you're going to get that will knock you, down And people should never judge anyone for going for help, getting this block, going for, the reset, going for taking medication. We all need help at some point. And
well, yeah. I mean, if you're sitting in judgment, I think you need to be careful when you sit in judgment.
Yes.
Because somebody will judge them as well.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have any, do you know offhand, any stellate ganglion, the stellate centers in New Jersey?
We have somebody in New York City, but I can certainly look into it.
Just to be curious. And does insurance cover this, or is this strictly out of pocket?
No, it's unfortunately out of pocket. We're working on getting insurance approval, but it's been quite the interesting journey. It's not there yet. Getting there, but not there yet.
It should be. I'll say my opinion, Dr. Lipov. It should be. I mean, if it could, if it helps someone's body and mental health and their body, because, of course, your mental health affects your body, I don't see why insurance companies won't, well, I can see why they don't pay for it, because they don't really want to pay for much of anything anymore. But I would think it would be more like a preventive medicine. You get this.
Yeah,
block.
But that's not how it works. That's not how it works.
I know.
Yeah, because they're willing to spend a lot of money on things that are working fairly well, but they don't seem to have a problem with that. When
people do go for this, get this block, do they still need to take if they are on any psychiatric medications, do they eventually get off of those, or do they still need to take it, or I guess it depends on the individual?
Depends on the individual, but a lot of people can at least reduce it. And what we also find that when people their fight and flight system or invisible machines come down, they can be much more present for the psychiatric interventions, which is great. So people do much better.
Well, that's fantastic. I was amazed about the stories in the book of people even seeing, I believe it was not just life better, but like colors and aware of more things in their environment and being calmer. I just think that it's amazing. It's incredible.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Do people when they go?
Amazing results.
Yes, yeah. And that's a good thing. So it's worth the money. Do they have to pay up front, or is it like a payment arrangements? How does that work if somebody wants this but they don't have?
They have all of that. Our company does all of that. But keep in mind, I just focus on the medical part. So there are financial people who do that. But no, I'm sure they have a really good way of financing and all this, and they've tried to make it as available as possible.
Because people probably want to know about that. I just think that medically, and your book really reinforced what I had thought all along, that you are in this fight or flight thing. I know I was on it, and I could easily be triggered into that, and how it affects you. It really does. And I just want to, encourage people, go on the website. It'll be in the blog, and check it out. And definitely check out the book. And I really can't thank you enough, Dr. Lipov, for writing this book with Jamie Mustard and doing all that you do to help people and being a voice for people who do have post-traumatic injury / disorder, and getting the stigma erased. That is just so important. And
I agree with you completely.
Very important. We need to have these conversations over and over again, and to encourage people really to seek treatment and medical help, because, you know what, folks, I could tell you personally, you can't do it by yourself. You really can't. I tried, and I knew that I needed to speak to somebody. Before I had Medicare, I was getting free counseling, grief counseling by a social worker, my senior center. I knew I needed more. I knew I needed someone to treat me in more in depth than a social worker. And I really, when I was reading this book, it's so hard to put in words, but so near and dear to my heart. Sometimes I get verklempt talking about it because it is so near and dear to me. And I really want to encourage people to seek the help that they need. And I'd like to know, Dr. Eugene Lipov, what last words of wisdom do you have for people and to encourage people?
Well, if they go on my website, DrEugeneLipov.com, we're starting the It's PTSI movement. So it's PTSI, so we have a commemorative pin and stuff like that. If people can check it out, fill out the, we want to do like a big drive and hopefully have a lot of people sign up. And if people buy that pin, a large part of it goes to ERASE PTSD Now, which is a non-for-profit that works with us. So people cannot afford that can get that treatment.
And your book is available on Amazon.com, or can
Correct.
they go on your website, or both?
Oh, it's available on Amazon. It's not available on my website. Only the pins.
Oh, okay.
But if you want an autographed copy, it's a different story. I charge more so I can get the money to the ERASE PTSD Now. Or people can go to they can go to bookstores, like Barnes & Noble carries it.
Oh, okay. And I wanted you to discuss, because it sounds interesting to me, what is ERASE PTSD Now, and how can people get involved in that?
Well, if you go on the website, ERASEPTSDNow.org, it's a non-for-profit. So no donation too small. Then I am a medical advisor for that company. And then the company has now paid for a bunch of people to have this procedure done at no cost. They also sponsor research, which I lead. So, I think the name speaks for itself. We're trying to get rid of PTSD, one person at a time.
Oh, that is so wonderful. If you were in front of me, Dr. Lipov, I would give you a hug. So I'm sending you a hug, virtual. You're welcome for. You're welcome for helping people. And you helped yourself with this, and you are helping. Well, yes, but you knew. Like, how did you know about it? Right? I mean, you helped yourself by going for this. I came up with it,
so yes. Yeah. So I came up with it, so I better know about it.
Yes. Yes, you came up with it, and you helped yourself. I mean, you're a wonderful walking testimony for it, and so are the people that you mention in your book. You have military people in your book. You have all different types of people with all different types of trauma giving testimony.
Yeah, it's not just limited to military, that's for sure.
Right.
It's not limited to military because, in fact, most of the people who have PTSD actually are abused women.
And that's a misconception, isn't it? A lot of people think, oh, I can't have post-traumatic injury because I wasn't in the military. But you don't have to be in the military.
That's not true. Absolutely not.
It's not true.
No,
yes, and
that's not true at all.
And that is becoming more common now. I mean, to talk about that it's not just for military personnel or first responders. It's your, everyday man, woman, child that can have post-traumatic from some event in their life. And really want to thank you again for coming on my show. Thank you for connecting with me on LinkedIn, reaching out to me, and thank you for the book. I was sent the book, and thank you for all you do to help others, and I really appreciate it. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Folks, all the information about Dr. Eugene Lipov, and that's spelled Lipov, will be in the blog that Jeannie White, who's station manager, writes. So please read the blog for information on how you can buy the book, how you can go to Stellate Center and find out how to become involved with ERASE PTSD Now. I'm going to look into that myself. And I just want to thank, you're welcome. You're welcome. I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Thanks for listening. If you don't already subscribe to Chatting with Betsy, please do so. It is free on Spotify, Spreaker, YouTube, just to name a few. And I want to just encourage you all to share this show to help other people. This is why I have Chatting with Betsy. I want to help people. I want people to know there's resources to help them have a better life. And Dr. Eugene Lipov, you are a wonderful resource. You are helping people. And I love having people on who have a passion and a desire to help others. We need to start having these conversations, folks. And here on Chatting with Betsy, you know I talk about what that people think are taboo, but they're not. And I'm going to keep having conversations about topics such as post-traumatic. Matter of fact, in July, I'm going to have somebody on who's going to talk about post-traumatic stress injury - disorder. And we need to have these conversations. We need to stop the stigma around mental health. As a matter of fact, it will be June tomorrow, right? Yes, June 1st is tomorrow. Yes, and June, folks, is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. Please take care of your brain. If you have any memory concerns, please speak to your primary care physician about being screened. And if you are looking for a support group, I have one, #Kick Alzheimer's S Movement on Facebook. That is a support group that I run. You do not have to have Alzheimer's. All dementias are welcome. You don't even have to be a caregiver. Most people are going to need a caregiver or will be a caregiver. So come on and join my group. And you can follow me on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, Wurzel. And Dr. Lipov, you gave your website, eugenelipov.com. Is that correct?
eugenelipov.com.
Good, okay. And the one for the Stella Center will also be in the blog. And folks, as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you could be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright. Because if we all did that, it would be a much brighter, kinder world, wouldn't it? And we need that now. Be kind, folks. Stop the judgment. Stop the stigma. Let's bring our humanity and our brotherhood back and start being loving human beings to each other. That's what I have to say today. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate World Talk Radio. Bye-bye now.